The Blood Angels had wasted no time. According to the astropathic communications between the Emperor and the fleet in orbit above the world, with Dante himself leading over 1,300 Astartes and 45,000 guardsmen to the surface, in the most densely populated region of the feral world. The natives were quite understandably panicked, as their world was so disrupted. The orcs had been unlucky, in that while all 25 of the rocks attached to the Space Hulk had made it to the ground, most had landed quite close together, preventing any sort of dispersal, and thus denying the orcs the ability to swallow up any territory uncontested. They had landed right on the edge of the feral orc habitat, and had wasted no time in beating the local populations of orc and human alike into servitude. The feral worlders were a hardy people, and had been enslaved without any time lost, put to work collecting timber, stone, water, and what few metals could be found, to expand the orc war machine. Dante and his troops had landed in the tribal gathering place, where several dozen related groups of humans offered up their meager tithes to the sole imperial temple on the globe. The orcs were thankfully still several hundred miles away, and from what could be told from their limited time there, the Blood Angels didn't see any artillery in their ranks capable of hitting the temple from that far away. Still, it was only a matter of time before the orcs found the gathering place and fell upon the natives with a vengeance. The firebombing of orc advanced structures had enraged the greenskin vermin, and provoked them into charging their ill-equipped forward scouts directly into the minefields that Dante had painstakingly placed in their path. The two Gargants and single Super Gargant in their force were almost 1,000 kilometers from the temple, which Dante had built with his base around with all the ease of a 1,000-year veteran. The feral worlders had been, quite naturally, terrified of the power armor-clad Astartes, and their initial reaction to their arrival had been terror, especially since they had no idea what was going on. The orcs hadn't gotten that far yet. The imperial liaisons on the world had the trouble of their lives, translating the concerns of the feral worlders to the imperial forces. In orbit above, the system overlord was trying his best to be helpful, but his efforts were about as useful as one could expect, which is to say, useless. Aside from adding the governor's own few ships and guards to his force, Dante had ignored the little man entirely. The planet around the temple was now looking like a war zone in itself, as the small army of tech priests and engine seers that had accompanied the Imperial Guard detachment hastily assembled prefabricated structures, ammo caches, vehicle annexes and garages, command centers, vox relays, armories, even a small laboratory had been built around the temple itself, which had been isolated when it was first built and was now looking to be swallowed up by the rapid building. The feral worlders had been told, in their own way with painstaking care by the sisters of the Ordo Dialogus, that the greenskin monsters that had fought them so many times had come to take their lives, and that the god emperor had sent his warriors to cleanse their homes of the creatures. The primitives had accepted the explanation without great complaint, as if arguing would have helped, and were now being ferried up to the waiting troop transports, quiet and afraid. Dante had sworn to protect as many of them as possible, but he was wise enough to recognize that the world was lost. No force as small as his could dislodge the sheer number of orcs on the planet and in orbit. Dante himself was leading the first company of the Blood Angels into battle. Flushed with victory over the orcs that had blundered into the mines he had laid, his veterans were backed by a full 700 troops from the 15th Cadian Mechanized Regiment, just over half of their strength. The guard forces were arrayed along either side of a rough canyon, the result of a freshly dammed river. The mines had been laid in a wide pattern across the distant end of the canyon, and Dante and his troops had carefully concealed yet more explosives, including some anti-armor mines, along the riverbed. The guard troops were high and dry, positioned along the lips of the canyon, and their vehicles were parked under camo netting on either side of the dam the engine seers had built only the previous day. Dante and 40 assault marines of the first company, with 40 more in reserve behind them under yet more camo netting, were stationed just below the dam itself. The engine seers, or more precisely, their servitors, were hastily covering the steel dam with a mass of logs and leaves. The 8 living members of the sanguinary guard stood atop the dam, their beautiful swords held at shoulder height. To the orcs, a group of 40 cornered Astartes was like an all-you-can-eat buffet to a starving shark, and before the detonation of the first few mines had even ceased, the greenskin Xenos were driving through the broad river plain in force, some pushing Gretchins before them, others yet clinging to the sides of the rattling trucks. Dante sighted the aliens on his auspex and clipped back into its pouch with a decisive nod. Gentlemen, the Xenos have taken the bait. We have perhaps 2 minutes before they arrive. Acknowledged, Chapter Master, the sanguinary guard captain replied, his own amplivisor returning the same view. The last of the servitors below scuttled back into the cover they had built, and their engine-seer masters bolted for the engineless rhino they had towed to the site the previous day, tucked away in the mass of wood matter. The sanguinary guard wasn't even trying to hide, as the plan demanded that they didn't. The orcs weren't smart, but they had an intuitive grasp of battle like nothing else in the galaxy, and subtlety, as ever, would be wasted on them. The sanguinary guard towed the hidden switch of the broad spotlight he had lugged onto the top of the camouflage dam, and the light kicked on, centered around the fore of the orc column, right on time.